Hey Restore, Pastor Ryan here. We're really thankful you're joining us in our final week of our series on joy. We got a chance to really look through a lot of the parts of joy. What does joy look like? And I want to encourage you, if you've missed any of the last few weeks on joy, I encourage you to go back and listen. You can find them on YouTube and on our Facebook page, but I really encourage you to go back and listen to the last few weeks of our joy series. I'm going to be looking at joy and this idea of filling it to the brim, right? Full to the brim, all the way up. And we're looking at John chapter 15, verses 9, 10, and 11 today. And this is what it says. I have loved you, even as a father has loved me. Remain in my love. When you obey my commandments, you remain in my love. Just as I obey my Father's commandments and remain in his love, I have told you these things so that you will be filled with my joy. Yes, your joy will overflow. I really love Who Hot. This isn't Who Hot's not sponsoring it. The logo is not going to pop up, and I hope we don't get taken down on Facebook because I've mentioned Who Hot a couple of times already in the first few moments of our message today. And I love it, right? I'm not sure if anybody else really likes to go there. I like it for a number of reasons, but I love it because you kind of get to make your own bowl, right? And of course, who doesn't love watching them, use those little sword stick things as they kind of do their thing and cook it up for you. They're cutting up the meat, making sure it gets cooked all the way, and just what a cool experience to see that. And I want to let you in on a secret. The secret is if you eat there, they charge you for a never-ending bowl, basically, right? You can keep going back and forth, but I found that you can take a to-go bowl and they give you a little bit bigger bowl. And you can take that with you to go home, right? So I don't want to brag, but I've kind of found the hack for filling the bowl up, to getting the most of which. So I'm going to let you in on how I do it. You ready? So you take the bowl, right? And you put some meat in the bottom, but then you take the beef and the pork that are the strips, right? You take that and you kind of almost make like a extra big bowl with it. So you make those extra high walls with the beef and the pork, right? And you put your veggies in there. You put all your veggies and more meat. You just load it up as high as you want it, right? Then it's time for the noodles. You put the noodles on last of all your ingredients, right? Because the noodles will kind of hold everything in place. So you get your noodles, whatever kind of noodles, you put them all on top, and now you got this big mounding bowl, right? Then you add your sauces. And so you start adding all the different kinds of sauces that you want it, and you pour them slow right down the center, because then it will go all in the middle of it, right? And then you fill it up really well, and then you take it to the guy that's going to kind of whatever he does with his little swords, and you give him, and then if you do it right, you get the stunned look of the crowd, of the onlookers as you walk up there. I was like, I can't believe he did that. That's amazing. It's this amazing engineering feat, right? There's this amazing engineering feat that you can just create. And it's an art, a beautiful artwork, and they get all this stuff up. Well, I went there, a few months ago up in Iowa City, and I created this big mounding bowl. And the guy that was coming up next to me to get his stuff was like, holy cows, how did you do that? I'm like, it's a science. I'm an artist, all right? And so they're cooking this all up, and then when you're getting it to go, they give you your to-go box, and they put it in there, and that you got to try to. The best when you know you've done a great job is when barely will seal, right? So then I took it and I went home and put it in my cooler, got home, put it in the fridge, and my plan was to eat it later that night, but also I was going to take it to work over the next few days. So the next day I kind of took portions of it out, put it in a bowl to reheat, and brought it to work. And I reheated it at work, and my coworkers are like, "Oh man, what's that amazing smell?" I was like, "I went to Hoo Ha yesterday. It's my lunch, right?" So I just take it in and I eat this wonderful, amazing meal that I prepared partially by myself. And then that evening, my stomach started to revolt on me. And I just started feeling sick, and I was in the bathroom, and Next day I'm feeling better, right? Packing my lunch. And I'm like, it couldn't have been the Hoo Ha, right? I'll bring it one more time. So I dished up my portion for lunch, threw it in the container, brought it to work. Oh, I ate it again. It was so good, right? That night, again, just sick to my stomach. Wow, I just didn't feel very good. And I just was like, what are you doing to me? You're supposed to be this delicious meal. And I thought, well, maybe, just maybe, the Hoo Ha wasn't to blame. Maybe it was something else. Maybe I was not feeling well. Maybe it was something else. It was just one of those random things that had happened twice in a row, right? And so I went to dish it up for a third time, and my wife, who's loving and caring and tried to protect me, grabbed it and says, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I know that I got sick the last 2 nights that I ate, days that I ate this, but I'm going to try it one more time just to be sure," right? She grabbed it and tossed it in the trash and said, no, what's wrong with you, right? And I said, it's delicious. That's what's wrong with me. And so I ended up taking something else, right? Whatever it wasn't Hoo Ha. It wasn't going to be as good as that, right? See, I want to think I'm a genius, but it shouldn't take a genius to think, okay, you got sick twice, you don't need to do it a third time. But I wanted to try it one more time. See, our flesh, my flesh, wanted to continue down that moment knowing something bad was probably on the other side. What does a proverb say? As a dog returns to his own vomit. In my flesh, the flesh of Ryan wanted to continue to go down that path of stomach destruction. My flesh wanted to keep doing that, even though in my spirit I knew it's not the right thing to do. You probably should have tossed it out after the first time you were sick. Our flesh doesn't make great choices. Our flesh doesn't want to lead us in the right direction. There's a baseball player named Josh Hamilton. You may know him, you may not. If you don't know him, Google it. Not while you're watching this. Just finish it first, right? His name is Josh Hamilton. And Josh was a phenomenal high school baseball player. Like, he was one of the best kids in the country when he was in his senior year of high school. And he had played so well and was doing such amazing things that they decided that I think the Tampa Bay Rays drafted him number 1 overall. And so they draft him number 1 overall, and he plays in their farm system. And he was doing well, but then all of a sudden he started struggling, and he got kind of involved in some drugs and alcohol, and his life just started spiraling out of control to the point where he ended up out of baseball. And he's out of baseball because he couldn't handle this lifestyle of this while he was still still allowing himself to be influenced by drugs and alcohol. And he leaves baseball. His team that has him drops him and gets rid of him. And as he's out of baseball, he kind of gets clean, and he starts. He goes home to be with his grandmother, and his grandmother kind of takes him in, right? And she helps him kind of detox out of all of the drugs and alcohol that are in his system. And he talked in an interview how just horrific the experience was. And he says he remembers his grandmother coming in when he was sweating profusely but freezing cold, covering him with blankets and laying her hands on him and praying for him. And his grandmother said that I've been praying for this moment. I've been praying for him to get clean off of drugs and alcohol for as long as I can remember. And she said I would get on my knees and pray feverishly over and over and over, asking God to do anything that it took to bring him back, to break the sin that was in his life. Now, some of you are parents and some of you are grandparents, and you may know what it's like to be on your hands and knees praying for your children or your grandchildren, and just hoping that they will follow what God has for them, right? And this was Josh's grandmother. And so he got clean and he started getting back in baseball shape and he started playing again. And he said he had a dream at some point, and this dream he said was extremely vivid. And the dream was of him playing baseball again in the major leagues. And he was at the All-Star game. And he said at the All-Star game, I won something so that I went to home plate and I was being interviewed by a woman dressed in white. And I was able to address the crowd at the game and also anyone else that was watching. And he talks about this and he says that in my dream, I addressed the crowd and I shared my testimony of what God had done in my life, how he had brought me out of addiction and brought me to this healing place in my life. And to God be the glory. And I was able to give my testimony, he said, in my dream. And he woke up and he said, my dream was so vivid, but so far. And he said, I just couldn't even imagine that happening because he was back to playing baseball, but he was so far from the major leagues. And within a few years, Josh was back playing and he had made the major leagues. And he was playing one of the seasons and he was playing really, really, really well, to the point where he was invited to the All-Star game and to participate in the home run derby. And as he was at the home run derby, he ends up winning the home run derby, right? And as he goes, they go to interview him, he's standing in Yankee Stadium, which is the stadium in the dream. And as this lady walks up to him to interview him after this win, she's dressed completely in white. And she starts speaking to him, and he takes to the microphone, and as he shares, it's reverberating because it's on the speakers of the stadium, but yet it's also being broadcast to millions of people around the world. See, Josh was able to be clean and share the testimony of the grace of God in his life. Unfortunately, a few years later, Josh kind of ended up flaming out of baseball and he left, and he ended up really getting back into drugs and alcohol again, and he kind of lost his way once again. See, Josh struggled for years and years and years of the flesh, his desires, the desires of his heart leading him in the wrong direction. And he finally gets clean. He finally finds hope in Jesus, and he starts walking, and the flesh is no longer in control of what he's doing. And then all of a sudden, this desire, the fleshly desire, comes back into his heart and starts to take him down a place that he knows he shouldn't go. See, our goal as believers, our goals as we follow Jesus is to put to death, right? To take that flesh and put it to death and die to ourselves and to follow Jesus into his presence, right? That's our goal, is to be in the presence of God and to live in the presence of God, to be there with him, to dwell, to abide in that moment with him. But to do that, we have to put to death the flesh, the desires of our heart. And for some of us, we have to do that every single day. And Albert Tate says this: the presence of God is a place your flesh will never lead you. See, our flesh, the desires of our carnal nature, the heart that is bent towards sin, will never lead you to the presence of God. To be able to be led to the presence of God, we need his help. We need his heart, his desire towards going towards that area in our lives. We need to every single day in these moments, to put this to death. So if it's true that the flesh is not going to lead us towards the throne of God, towards his presence, then we have to put this to death. Galatians 5:24 says this: those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its desires and passions. So what that's saying is if we are in Christ, if our life is with him, then we are putting to death, we are crucifying the flesh, the desires, and the passions, because they're going to only lead us towards destruction. They're only going to lead us towards eating the plate of food that is causing us to get sick over and over and over again. So we have this idea that in order to be bent towards, in order to go towards the presence of God, to be dwelling in that moment, like it's shared in this passage of John, when he talks about how will you dwell in this, will you abide in this, will you obey the commands to remain in my love, to do that, to abide and remain and dwell in his presence, in his love. We have to crucify the flesh, our desires that bend us away from God. Have you ever been in the presence of somebody that you admire, look up to, that you're in awe of? I've had this experience numerous times. I've been to like different card shows or gotten autographs of baseball players. And so I've had this experience where I've been in the presence of somebody that's kind of larger than life. And when I was in college, there was this, our school had this opportunity to go play basketball at the Target Center before a Timberwolves game. And so, man, we were pumped, we were excited. And so that year, I decided that I was going to be the water boy, that I was going to be the towel boy, the water boy. I was going to help the team out. And so I would go on road trips. I would help out the team with that kind of stuff. But this amazing thing about being able to go and do this was that I got a chance to go and be a part of this Timberwolves game, right? This game that we got to be a part of. And so going to this, being a part of this, I decided that I had this magazine that I was going to try to get autographed by Kevin Garnett, right? I had this magazine that he was on the cover of, and I was going to try to go get this autographed. And so I went to do this. And so I thought, I got to find a way to meet him. And I wasn't sure exactly how that was going to happen. My thought was, okay, as a team, we're going to be down kind of by the locker rooms or by a locker room. Maybe I can kind of make my way through the bellies of Target Center and find him, right? And so I thought to myself, also, maybe I should dress to the nines. And so I dressed in a suit and tie and made my way into the bellies of the Target Center. And I started kind of walking around, and I had a lanyard on that let people know that I was with the basketball team. And so I was dressed in a suit and tie with nice shoes, and I was walking around the bottom of the stadium, and I was going left and right, trying to find out where I was at, where I was going. And I finally got to where I thought I should not be, which was near, I think, was the locker room. And off to my left side, there was a long row of tables, and on the table, it had all of these basketball shoes, pictures, magazines, all this kind of stuff. And onto the right side was what I believed to be the locker room. So when players would come out, they could just autograph these things. And so I kind of stood out there for a moment, acting like I belonged, right? Kind of acting like and somebody walked by and kind of gave me a look, like, is this guy supposed to be here? And I said, how you doing? Pretending to fit in, right? And all of a sudden, this very, very tall gentleman walked out. And I said, I bet this is Kevin Garnett. And so I grabbed my magazine, my hands were just shaking, right? And I said, Mr. Garnett, will you sign this for me? And he looks back and starts walking away. He's got a hooded sweatshirt over it, up, he's got his hood up, he's walking away. And when he looked at me, I knew it was Kevin. And I said, Mr. Garnett, will you please sign this for me? And he turns on and says, I ain't Kevin. And I said, I know it's you. Kevin Garnett, I know it's you. Will you please just sign this for me? And he just keeps walking. And I said, all I wanted to do was just sign this. But I remember the moment that I looked at his face, when I knew it was him, I was struggling to find the words. I was struggling to just stay composed. And I remember shaking the entire time and just being in his presence, seeing him for the first time. He was so much taller than I expected, right? He was so much bigger than I thought he was ever going to be. I remember as he walked off, a few minutes later, a wonderful security guard helped me find where I was belonging and supposed to be, right? He just guided me towards where I was supposed to go. I was in this extreme moment of awe and wonder, struggling to find the words to say as I stood there in his presence as he walked away. See, when we crucify our flesh and we get to sit in the presence of God, there are times at the beginning and even now, all these years later, following Jesus, that at times I just kind of get awestruck and I can't find the words, and I trip over myself trying to find the words to say, the words to use to meet Jesus, to meet God the Father. And I'm just in this awe presence. And in this passage in John, the scriptures, Jesus is saying, I need you to just be in me. He said, I need you to abide. I need you to remain in my love. Will you just sit in my love, in my presence, obey the commands my Father has given like I've done? Will you just be in here? He says, if you can do that, if you can do those things, as I've told you, you will be filled with my joy. See, oftentimes we don't get it. As humans, we don't get it. We don't really get what joy is. You see, we sometimes think that joy is not having any troubles, right? Elizabeth Elliot says this: joy is not the absence of trouble, it is the presence of God. See, joy isn't this idea of no trouble. See, we have to have this mantra as believers, dying to my flesh. Today, I need to die to the flesh. I need to do this. For some of us, we have to routinely say this to us, maybe on a daily basis. It's not my will, but your will. It's not my passions and desires. It's your passions and desires. Allow me to be in your presence, because that's where we find joy. That's where we find out where joy is at. See, my flesh does not want to bend towards the presence of God. My flesh is trying to find joy in anything but the presence of God. See, I have to train myself to not eat all the sweets that I want to eat, but I have to train myself to eat the fruits and the nuts and the vegetables that are good for me, and not to eat the cookies and the candies that I want to eat. See, if we want to experience the presence of God and the overflowing joy He has for us, day after day, we have to kind of lean into the words of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And it says this: when Christ calls a man, He bids him come and die. In different translations, John 15:11 will say it differently. Some say to overflow, right? That I will fill you to joy overflowing. And some talk about how I will make joy mature in you. I really, over the last few years, have found great pleasure and comfort and just a peace when I make bread. And I think it's a process of it, right? It's a process of doing this. And so whenever I make sourdough bread, I have to get my starter ready to be used. And so I have to, if it's been in the fridge or if I've not fed it in a while, I've got to kind of feed it for a number of days in a row in order for it to be ready to be making bread. And so I will take out half a cup of the starter, and I take 3/4 of a cup of flour and half a cup of water, and I mix it all up really, really good. I take the old starter out and I rinse it and I wash it and I dry it really well. And then I put the new starter, the fresh one, back in the jar and seal it back up and put it on the counter. And often I have, when it's not ready, it's not been fed in a couple of days, I have to do this for a number of times in a row. Sometimes I'll do it a couple of times a day for like 3 or 4 days to get it ready to be used. And then finally, when the sourdough starter is actually ready, I will feed it, I'll put it on the counter, and when it's ready, when it's mature, it'll actually double in size really quick. Like 4 to 6 hours, it'll be ready and mature. And then you know it's ready when you open it up. It gives off this aroma, this smell. It smells like kind of like a yogurt, right? This sour taste to it, and you know that it is mature and ready. And Jesus is sharing in this passage that when you abide in me, that when you stay in my commands, when you do what I ask, when we walk in step together, when we go and bend towards my presence, you are in the presence of God over and over and over. And our flesh becomes weaker because we continue to put that to death. We give off this aroma. We give off this aroma, this smell, this mature joy to others. I remember when I was growing up as a kid, my mom would often make bread. And she would make buns and loaves of bread. And then on Friday nights, at different times, we would make homemade pizza. And so she would have homemade dough ready for us, and so I remember that she would mix it all up and put it in this. I want to say it was a yellow giant Tupperware container, and put the lid on it and put it on the counter, and then it would rise up to where it was kind of pressing against the top, and she would take the top off and she would kind of punch it down, right? Kind of punch it down and then put the top back on, and it would kind of do the same thing again. And I remember one of the times that she made bread, it had risen so much so that it spilled out all over the counter, and it was kind of going towards the edge of the counter, ready to kind of spill out all over where we were at. And so we had to grab it quickly and put it back into the container. But the idea that this dough was just overflowing to other parts of our counter was amazing, because I think that's what God wants us to do. So I believe God wants us to be in his presence so he can give us joy, but not just a little bit of joy. He wants to give us joy overflowing, so that the joy that God has given us, the joy in us, just permeates and flows to other people around us. My garden, when it gets really dry out, I have to water it, and I've got a soaker hose that I put in with my tomatoes so that it can kind of take its time getting to the right spots. And when the ground is really dry, it'll kind of crack and have these valleys, these things have been cut into the ground because of how dry it is, and it'll cut kind of around the garden, and you got to kind of water that again so that it kind of is taken care of. And when you water a garden, the first place that it goes, it starts to fill up those cracks and those crevices in the ground, and it rejuvenates where it was at. You see, often in our lives, we go through these difficult, hard moments, and these cracks and these valleys are formed in our souls and our hearts. We go through these things and we think, how will I ever be healed? And I can tell you that in some of my darkest moments and times, people have come alongside of me when I feel the driest, and they have brought this joy. They brought this joy that overflows from their heart into my soul and fills that brokenness that I have. You see, you get to be in the presence of God, be filled with joy overflowing, and bring healing to those around you. That's the good medicine of joy. That it just doesn't stay with us, right? The problem with faith sometimes is when we allow all the love God has given us, the joy he's given us, the peace that he's given us, the hope that he's given us to stay in us. When we allow that joy just to stay here, but God calls us, and Jesus says, if you abide in me, I want to fill you with joy. But see, I don't want to fill you with just a little bit of joy. See, I want to fill you with joy overflowing. The wounded hearts that we carry, the wounded hearts that are around us, get to be healed with the good medicine of joy. I want to go back to the Elisabeth Elliot quote. Joy is not the absence of trouble, it is the presence of God. We have to put to death our fleshly desires, the things that are causing us to bend from God. When we put that to death, we get to go towards his presence, to be filled with his joy. See, we have mistaken that joy and no trouble are interconnected or related. See, not only are they not related, they're not even distant cousins. See, we find joy in the presence of God. We are filled with his joy overflowing. We are overflowing with his joy, and then you and I get to go and find people that are in need of healing, of the joy of God. We get to bring this amazing medicine to those around. So my encouragement to you is an encouragement that's been for me is are you allowing yourself to be in God's presence, to be overflowing with joy so that it goes to those around you who need it the most?